Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodian of the land where we are standing and operating. I'd like to pay my respect to all the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. I hope you all get very inspired by this workshop, and welcome you all.
I'm just completely overwhelmed that we've got, I think, 75 people joining us today, which is lovely. And I just need to check that you can hear me. Can you all give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Thanks, Sabrina. That was a bit too much. And I have to acknowledge that it is a bit awkward being the owner of Slow Clay Centre and then being introduced by Slow Clay Centre. But I have resisted doing a workshop about my own work ever since we started, and that was in 2012, mainly because I didn't want to be seen to be promoting myself in any way. But we got to a point where we just cancelled guest artist after guest artist, and we're now in another heavy lockdown. And Sabrina said to me, "Why don't you do one instead? Everyone would love to see your work." And I kind of went, "Yeah, okay," but I'm a bit nervous, and I just have to say to you, the whole technology thing leading up to this was far beyond my capabilities. I've got a couple of fantastic team in the background on the cameras. We're hoping that everything's going to work, but if it doesn't, I'm just asking for your patience, because this is a new thing for us. Anyway, I'm really excited, as I said, to see you all. I'm really excited to have people joining us from New Zealand. Hello, Moira, and from interstate. Hello, Jan, and lots of familiar faces and friends. So it's wonderful to have you here. I just wanted to summarise very quickly what I'm going to cover in the workshop, and then I'll get into a little presentation. So the first thing will be just to give you a little bit of background and context. And those of you who got our email during the week with links to some films to watch, you would already have a little bit of context if you didn't already know my work or know about me just through those films. But I wanted to give you a little bit more than that and flesh it out a little bit more. There's only about 15 slides or so, but if I can get into that, that will set the context for why I ended up doing the sort of work that I'm doing at the moment. And it'll be sort of consecutive development, basically, a linear kind of development. So I'll start at the beginning and I'll end at the end. So we'll take over from that presentation, which will be through static slides. Then I will get on to making a few things, and I'll be able to try and talk through that process as I'm making things. And as Sabrina said, if you've got any questions, you can put them in the chat bar, because it might just help me to have a few questions instead of making in total silence. And then we'll have a little intermission. That should take us to about 4:15, and then we'll have a little intermission, just 5-minute coffee break, and come back, and then I will do another presentation, part 2, which is about my current work and what I'm working on now. So that'll set the scene for that, and then followed by another demonstration. So presentation, demo, and then at the end we'll open up for a Q&A. And we're not quite sure how that's going to work yet. We'll fly with chat bar questions, and Sabrina will be monitoring them as we go, and can save them up till the end if they're more appropriate at the end. But please don't hold back if you want to know anything, or I'm going too fast, or too, I will go slowly probably, because slow is my middle name. But yeah, just don't hold back with the questions. So I'll share my screen now and get into the presentation. This is my home studio, and this is why we didn't film it at home. So the home studio is in this state pretty much all the time. Dog running in and out, mess everywhere, yeah, work in progress, and it's just not a great place to film things. But I just wanted to show you where I am, just so that you can see that's the sort of situation that I'm working in. And on the right, the images of my wheel. So because I work mostly on the wheel, I have a very comfortable setup. You know, it might look a bit uncomfortable. I have to clamber into that hole and sit with my legs either side of the wheel. But once I'm in, it's like I'm in a car driving, and I've got my setup, I've got all my tools around me, and it's just a really nice place, a nice sort of situation to be in. So I do feel very lucky to have that. I'll move on. This is where we are today. Sabrina is in the office, I'm in the main room, and I've got the team ready to jump on the cameras when I start, but we're in this big room at the bottom. So Slow Clay Centre, we think of it a bit like a TARDIS. It's tiny from the outside, and that's the image you see walking down the street. But if you walk up the laneway and in a door at the back of the laneway, you enter this big room, and that's where we are now. And I'm basically in the middle. You can't see, but me pointing, and I don't seem to have a pointer, but essentially in the middle of the room with the blackboard behind me. So that just gives you an idea of where we are. So back into the context, if you'd seen that film during the week, you'd see that I was pretty inspired by this bowl right at the beginning that my sister brought back from Japan. She was an exchange student, and at the time I was doing an art education degree, majoring in ceramics. And that bowl was essentially the catalyst for opening the doors to me. And this was in the early 1980s, and sort of postmodernism was, let's just say postmodernism was in, and it was a time when the touch of the hand was out of fashion and anything Japanese was out of fashion. In fact, I was told, don't even mention Japan, you know, when I actually came back from Japan, but that's another story. So this was unusual at the time is what I'm trying to say. But it did spark off my interest in Japanese techniques, and I was invited by Andrew Halford. I met Andrew Halford at a ceramics conference. I was blown away by his techniques. He embodied all of the things that I was kind of wanting to learn. He was very relaxed with his moves in through the clay. He was very confident, very slow, but in the most confident, relaxed way. And I hadn't seen anyone throw like that before on the wheel. So I was absolutely mesmerised by his ability, his skill, and desperately wanted to learn from him because my teacher at university was English trained and completely the opposite, quite formal and quite tight with his throwing, which was great. He was a fantastic teacher, but when I saw Andrew throwing, I just thought, I want a bit of that for me. So he was very gracious and offered me an apprenticeship for 1 year, which turned into 3 years, and I entered his studio, which was a big studio in Terry Hills in the north of Sydney. And I had, with all sorts of graduates, people from college renting space from Andrew. But Andrew also had a full-time production thrower working with him, Lex Dixon, who some of you might remember, beautiful Lex. And I worked alongside both of those two absolute incredible people and learnt so much in those 3 years. And Andrew always said, so that's Andrew on the right in his younger days, and me on the left in my younger days. But Andrew always said he would connect me to a studio in Japan if I wanted to go. And at the end of the 3 years with him, he said, righto, where are you going to go? And I went, I don't know. And in those days, no internet or anything to do our searches, and I had one little book, and in that book I opened the page to a pottery called Shisaigama and read about it and became mesmerised by that, which was a cooperative. So these are some of Andrew's work, just to set the scene for you about how much of an accomplished thrower he is, and he's also known for his slip inlay decoration. Andrew, though, before I get to Japan, Andrew was actually, he trained in Japan himself. So everything, his wife was Japanese, he spoke Japanese, ate Japanese, everything. And he had been in Japan for 5 years prior to coming back to Australia. And he had trained in Mashiko in Japan, which was kind of like the centre of the Mingei Association. And if you know about Mingei and what it means, then you would have heard about Bernard Leach, Hamada Shoji, and Yanagi Soetsu. At least those are sort of three of the main members, but there were about 6 or 7 other main members of the Mingei Association. And they set up an association starting in the 1920s, and it was a kind of post-industrial, West industrial movement, but it was also very much in order to try and save and preserve some of the traditional heritage of the handmade, particularly in Japan, but also in Korea. So they travelled throughout Japan and Korea and basically encouraged people not to give up their hand skills in the face of the impending industrialization, which, if you know about history, that was about 100 years later in Japan than the rest of the world, because Japan was closed for all those years. So that became the sort of underpinning of the 20th century craft movement in the Western world. Amongst other things, it was one of the kind of key movements of the 20th century craft movement. So I don't want to focus too much on Mingei, but other than to say that Andrew was very much of that training and production throwing. And the pottery that I ended up connecting with in Japan, and who offered me an apprenticeship in Japan, this pottery, Shusaigama. They are known as a new Mingei pottery. Essentially, that just means they are not one of the kind of first generation 400-year-old master apprentice style of potteries in Japan, which is very common. But new Mingei means they're sort of post, you know, they've established after the Mingei Association established, and they were directly influenced by the travels that Hamada Shoji, Bernard Leach, and Yanagi Soetsu, their travels and their encouragement were very, very pivotal in Shusaigama starting. And Shusaigama are a cooperative, and they made work a little bit like this, which if you saw the previous slide, and the slide on the right is from Onta, that's contemporary, but that brushed slip decoration. And Shusaigama also, part of their decorative quality is brushed slip, and so was Andrew Halford as well. So of course that is going to be passed on to me. I absolutely love slip, and that's why that's my lineage essentially, and why I love it so much. But it comes originally from the Korean buncheong ware, which is from the 16th century. And it has got a slightly dark, well, more than slightly dark history with what was called the Pottery Wars in Japan, where Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Korea, kidnapped potters, amongst a lot of other people. Artisans were part of who he kidnapped and brought back to Japan and resettled and made to work, making work which was initially humble tea bowls and humble rice bowls and tea and food utensils, but in the hands of the Zen tea masters, which were very popular at the time and come into fashion, the tea ceremony had taken off, and we're talking the 16th century, of course, then those humble rice bowls became very revered tea bowls. So there's a history there, good and bad. I'm not sure of the absolute nitty-gritty of it, but all I know is that I feel that people need to know about the history of slip when they're using slip and they've got an Asian connection like I do. I like to acknowledge that at the very least, that it's not an easy place to sit when we're using slip. At the end of my 2 years training at Shusaigama, and look, I do have a whole other presentation which I'm not going to bore you with today, but it's about training in Japan and all the nitty-gritty and the kiln and the glazes and the making of the clay and the philosophy and everything that I was sort of immersed in for those 2 years. And that, I think Sabrina, we might have to have another lecture one day with that, because I think that would make a good topic for it. But as I said, I'm not going to go into that in detail today, other than to say, as I left Japan, I had a study tour that was given to me by my lovely teachers, who said, you can't leave Japan after 2 years, without going and visiting a whole lot of other potters and seeing a whole lot of other work. So I left their studio with my, backpack over my shoulder and set off. I was heading towards England to meet up with my then boyfriend, Peter, who later became my husband. But he was in England and was heading there, but I did this wonderful study tour through Japan on my way out. And it took about a month, and I just stopped every few days at another pottery and hung around and asked questions and took photos and helped with kiln firings and whatever I could. So this was the last port of call before I jumped off Japan and into Taiwan, and then before I took a flight to England. And Okinawa is a very, very special place. And I, after having 2 years in Japan, sort of immersed in the very sort of subdued aesthetic, suddenly there were bright colours and terracotta, and it was just it suddenly hit me in the face. This is a tropical country, by the way. It's not like mainland Japan. It's very, very far south, and it was its own kingdom for many, many years. So it has this brightly coloured pottery, which is indicative of China more than Japan, perhaps. But I absolutely loved that contrast of dark clay, white slip, overglazed painting, and the terracotta sort of look. And when I got to England, this is the sort of work that I was met with. I mean, this is sort of lovely, old, obviously very old work, but the slipware baking dishes, the terracotta from the Staffordshire red, which is actually a stoneware rather than an earthenware, and then the lovely slip kind of dairy bowl. So those things, the things that I took with me from that whole experience were slip, and you can see a few different slip pictures there, brushed, poured, dripped, dipped, whatever, finger wipes, whatever, and terracotta, and the strength and beauty of terracotta. So those two things, that sort of sets the scene for where I ended up. And this is some of the first work that I started making back in the early days after coming back to Australia after a couple of years in Edinburgh, a couple of years in England, working on my own work for the first time. And I did, basically you can see terracotta, white slip, underglazed paintings, graffito, and then this sort of work as well with different coloured slips, so black slip and ochre clays. So again, you can see from the dates there, that's sort of 1990s. So I'm going to stop there and get on to the demo now. So I'm going to start with a large bowl, and I wanted to start, before I showed you all the images of my work, I just wanted to sort of show you some making, because it's sort of much more interesting, I think, than images. And I'm putting a base pad down here. This is a little trick that I learned from Andrew Halford. When you're making bigger things, it's helpful to put a base pad down that you really compress first, and then the next lump on top like that. So it doesn't matter how many times you do that, you can build up more and more. But perhaps you're not able to wedge as much in terms of large pieces. So this really compresses the base nicely. So I'm going to make a bowl. So the last slides I showed you were of work when I first came back from all of that training and 2 years making work in Edinburgh in Scotland. Fairly low key. I jumped into mass production and just sold my work wherever I could in Edinburgh, including markets, craft markets and shops, and had a couple of small exhibitions. But 2 years went very quickly, and also it was cold. So at some point I said to Peter, let's go to Australia. And Pete's not from Australia. He's from a hot country, Gibraltar, which is kind of hotter than Australia in many respects. So he just said, yep, okay, I'll go to Australia. And we came back. Well, I came back and he came to Australia at the beginning of 1990. So I had a studio in Fitzroy in those days, and it had a gallery above the studio. And I was very, very convinced that the way to sell things was direct to people, direct to customers. Really helped me in the early days when I didn't know anybody. And it took a long time making work and selling direct like that before I was brave enough to kind of ask people to, for exhibitions and things like that. So today's equivalent would be having your own Instagram account, I guess, and managing your own career in that way. And it's a wonderful thing if you can do that while you're getting established, at least, if not for the whole time. So, yeah, that was how I started back in Australia. And there came a point after about 10 years where I sort of felt a bit flat. I had 2 young children, and I was a bit despondent that I was finding it actually quite a struggle, let's just say, to sell work. What had happened in Australia was that we had, and any of you who have been around as long as me would know this, that we had the trade tariffs lifted in the 90s, and suddenly our market was flooded with very good but mass-produced pots. And we couldn't really, it was very difficult to sell straight pots like functional pottery and compete with those sorts of prices. So I kind of stepped sideways a bit and went back to university and did a fine art master's degree at RMIT. And I had Prue Venables as my supervisor. And Prue was just wonderful because she challenged me to say, okay, what is it about all of this, ceramics, whatever, what is it that is really moving and motivating to you? And that really helped to distill the fact that I liked the wheel, I liked movement and the dynamism, and I liked those that symbiotic relationship that I mentioned in our introduction, that it was a kind of relationship between 3 entities: the person, the maker, the clay, and this spinning energy. And I think there's something very compelling about that to most people who use the wheel. That is a huge attraction just in itself. But for me, my teenage years were spent growing up on a big cattle farm in northeast Victoria. And I was sort of last night thinking about how I relate things to movement. And I was, for the first time, I was thinking, oh, maybe there's something, as a young cowgirl, sort of teenage cowgirl, how I would be able to preempt a moving herd of cattle, and if one of them jumped out, I'd be able to bring it back in again. This is all on horseback, of course, back in again, but you could do it on a bike, it doesn't matter. And that moving mass is kind of a flow in a similar way to working on a wheel might be a flow. So there's this, I wouldn't want to do it with sheep, let me tell you, I'm definitely a cow preference person, but that is a big moving mass, and I kind of wonder whether something's in there. But I think above and beyond all that, most people just love the wheel for that energy. Now I'm going to break the energy and I'm going to do something that is a bit unusual and a bit odd. I'm going to cut some holes in the wall, but I'm going to cut some windows in here. And this is the sort of work that I started developing as part of the master's degree. So you see there's a hole there. I'll do another one here. What the masters gave me, doing a master's and doing it part-time over 4 years rather than full-time, was just fantastic, because I was able to kind of noodle around in my studio for the first time, not be worried about making an income for the sake of it, and I still made other things, it's definitely a view to experimenting and playing. So one of the things I wanted to do was capture the energy of the spinning wheel, but also to push it off centre and play with it a little bit off centre, because I loved that energy. The tea bowl, the original bowl image that I showed you before, the tea bowl was so compelling in its off-centeredness. But the wheel was very, very much a powerful dominating force when it's centered. So how do you break that energy and force and still maintain a sense of confidence? So I came up with this weirdo technique, and I haven't ever seen anyone do it. I just kind of invented it, and I haven't shown many people. So this is one of the few times I've shown it to people. But essentially, I rejoin these holes, pushing it down like this. There's not many clays that you could do this and get away with it. Most of them would crack if you were doing high firing reduction stoneware. They would probably crack and not cope with it. But with the terracotta, low firing, terracotta is a very robust clay as well. And so it gives me that ability to really get into the clay and muck around with it and rejoin things in this way. So I have only done one Zoom workshop before, and that was about a month ago for a UK potters group, and I made this bowl for them. And somebody in the chat room said, "But how did you come up with that idea?" But I just started playing, and I had that parameter around me, like I wanted to make it wobbly, but I wanted a sense of confidence still in throwing, and I tried lots and lots of different ways. I tried cutting the rim, I tried all sorts of different ways, but this is the one that I ended up resting on, and I still use it a lot today and come back to it for various shapes and various forms and tones. So I'm just going to spin the wheel quite slowly now and just concentrate on the rim and really push it down, really work that rim. And you can see that I'm moving my body as well. So for me, throwing, and it may be again related to being a cowgirl, but throwing is very much a whole body experience, not just in the ends of my fingertips. So it's a play, if you like, between moving fingers and moving body and leaning into it and playing around with it. So I'm just going to keep on doing that. I'll probably stop talking now while I do the rest of it, because it's good enough. And you'll see as I go. And I'm just going to join over a few more joins before I go further. If there are any weak spots, just plug it with a bit of soft clay. That really helps to stop it cracking open again in the firing. Same with this. So I'm not starting this demonstration with throwing off the hump. I'm not starting with the methods that we teach at Slow Clay at all, because they're widely available, and you can see that on our Slow Clay website anyway. But this sort of work is less commonly seen, perhaps, at least from me. So this is Keen's red terracotta, which I really love. It's very, very smooth. It's an 80 mesh clay, and so very nice and smooth and dense. But it is a manufactured clay. The other one that I really love is Bennett's terracotta. I've used that a lot. I've used all of the terracottas in Australia, and they all have different qualities that are interesting. But this particular one I've been using quite a lot recently. Firing at 1120. So it's kind of the high end of earthenware. These tools here modelled off Andrew Halford, so my first teacher that he had in Japan and had either made, I'm not sure the history of where they come from. Now, I don't know whether you can see that undulation in the rim now. It's getting quite thin, so I'm kind of thickening it up again just on the rim, moving in with it. And what I want to do, what I like to do, is to take it quite low as I can before it collapses. And if it does collapse, then you can all just give me a clap, because I do lose quite a few of these when I take them down to the limit. But you just recycle the clay and start again. But I do want to get that really undulating rim into the flow of it. So taking it like, and also if you're a potter and you've done a lot of throwing before, you'll realise that open shapes like this do shrink upwards again too. So I want to take it as low as I can before knowing that it's going to shrink up a little bit higher. I think that's probably close to where I'm going to end up without it collapsing. Let's hope it doesn't. For me, this is my expression, and obviously I like to finish off things in particular ways, and just putting some kind of spiraling and a bit of a play with the rim and really kind of forcing it. There have been lots of iterations of this bowl, I have to say. Lots of iterations where I've grasped it, stuck my fingers into it, made kind of imprints in it similarly to this. And my idea of playing with it all, this is not just the looks, but to try and encourage people to also touch and connect with ceramics and with clay. So that's our bowl for now, and I'm going to move on and make a teapot for you. There's just two more things I want to make for you. One is what I call a pillow form, like an enclosed form, which is actually going to become a teapot. And then I've got one to trim and put to assemble for you later. But I wanted you to see that because it's probably, again, a little bit unusual in the sense that it's not this kind of standard thing to teach necessarily. So I usually like to make things fairly quickly when I'm just making the body of something, making it fairly quickly. Warts and all doesn't really matter to me if it's a bit off centre or it's a bit wobbly. After you've seen that last bowl, you probably realise that's part of the whole expression for me. But also you can centre as you go, very much so.
Jane, there is just a comment from Helena saying, wonderful to hear her process. Please
Oh,
tell her.
thank you, Helena. That was very nice. Yeah, I'm still feeling very nervous as I'm doing this. So it's good to hear that. Thank you. Oh, oh, there we go. We're off-centered, a bit of adding to the off-centeredness. Okay, so these teapots, and you might have seen one in a couple of teapots in the actual marketing that we did for this workshop. But these are made as pillows, and they're part of the same sort of story of exploration, if you like, that I did for the master's degree, just to try and shake up my work a bit, try and get to the essence of what it was all about for me and why I wanted to work in clay. And this was another body of work which I loosely call the Pillow series, which is about enclosing off at the top. And there are many people that do this. It's not singular to me at all. But I wanted to explore different ways of doing it in different forms. And I thought, well, actually, it might suit a teapot because, and you'll see in a minute when I close it off, that I have, what it allows me to do is have a nice sort of curved lip at the top. There is a teapot behind me. Can you guys see that on that teapot there or not? Maybe I'll just bring it down sometime. I won't actually show you that. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, no, don't worry. I'll just show you a bit later, a finished one. But essentially, by closing it off, I just created this way of making a curved rim that is floppy and that traps air in. And then you can use the air pressure to push back at you, essentially. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, because the idea of pushing back, or the clay obviously clay pushes back to you in some regard. Whatever you touch is touching you back. And with the wheel, of course, you've got that spinning motion as well. But when you've got air pressure inside as well, so when I close it off and I trap air inside it, you've got another kind of entity that's helping to kind of push back at you, if you like. So the last little bit usually takes a bit of coaxing, and this is again where things might just all flop and go a bit haywire, but we'll see how it goes. And I'm not going to worry, I've got 70 people watching me, it doesn't matter. Once I've got it closed off though, I can breathe a bit better. So here we are. And closed. So now I've got air trapped inside it. And now this is where some fun begins. So if I've got it like that, I mean, that's not going to be much of a teapot like it is. And I wanted to get it a little bit more, I want to play with it a little bit more and see what I can do. So with air trapped inside it, I can manipulate anywhere along that wall if I want. I can make it rounder by pushing at the top. I can make it narrower by squeezing it in to a certain extent. I mean, the clay will tell you when it's had enough and it doesn't want to be pushed too much. But one of the things I do at the end, once I've played around with it like that, is push it in at the top a bit. And I can play with this a lot more if I actually open it up and make a little hole in it. Doesn't matter where the hole goes, but you kind of automatically do it in the middle. And then let out some of that air. Just do a bit more. And you can see it's starting to sag already. But there might be a point where I think, okay, that's enough. I'm going to freeze it there. Just put my finger over the hole, close it off again, and it will remain there. And then later on in the workshop, I'm going to show you how I cut away and make a flange for the lid and measure the lid for it and turn it actually into a teapot. So that's the actual throwing of the body. I'm going to make a spout and a lid for you as well. I'll pop this one off though.
How much clay did you use there, Jane?
That was just 900 grams. Yeah.
Okay.
Under a kilo. Yeah, really is that one. So I'll just do a tiny bit of extra throwing where I will throw off the hump and make a spout and a lid. The terracotta, I think it's more that it's low temperature, although terracotta is quite a robust clay anyway, but it's probably more that it's low temperature. It doesn't get subjected to extremes of heat and firing atmospheres or anything. So I think it'd be hard to do with porcelain, but a stoneware, it probably would be okay. But for all those other reasons that I mentioned before, I love terracotta. I do use a black stoneware now, and you'll see in the slides later in the next presentation that I'm using a few other clays now, not just terracotta. But I still love terracotta, and I still return to it a lot and use it a lot. I know that there are quite a number of professional potters and ceramic artists in this Zoom watching, and I kind of feel very awkward because some of these things might seem very, very basic to you, and I'm sorry if they do. I'm trying not to make it too basic. I always love to see how other people do things, and one of my friends says, you know, if you only see one thing in a workshop that's meaningful, then that's enough. And I kind of agree with that. So I hope this is reasonable in the sense that slightly different ways of doing things for you. So that was a spout, and we'll make a little lid now. Just wanted to talk about these lids because there's no measuring. I don't have to measure these lids, which is really great. So I will just be making, no, I just keep it on my hands, that's fine. So the good thing about making the teapot body first and not cutting a flange in it is that you can make the lid, and okay, if you're doing a run of them, then you want to make the lid the same. And the other thing is, I like to make 2 or 3 lids to give to customers who are buying teapots, because you don't want somebody coming back with a broken lid saying, you know, can you make me another one like 10 years later? So basically, if you give them 2 or 3 spare lids, or 2 lids, let's just say, one spare and one, they'll think that you're absolutely wonderful, and then you'll have saved yourself a lot of difficult work later. So yes, you can measure your lids if you're doing that, of course, but the idea is that you can get away without measuring the lid with this technique, because you can cut the flange to match the lid later, which is kind of a nice way around, really. Finish it off, and then this is quite important, getting good compression in where you're going to cut it off. And where's that knife? Being able to cut it off and And the last thing I'm going to make on the wheel is one of these collapsed. So the latest work I've been doing, I've been playing around with forms that are deliberately collapsed, and they've got a fair bit of movement in them. So sort of, again, trying to capture some of that movement, but letting them collapse. And one of my heroes is Takeshi Yasuda, who, I don't know whether you know of his collapsed vase forms, but they're absolutely amazing. And he collapses them and then sort of hangs them upside down to dry. And it sort of got me thinking that for this, I was doing a body of work, and I'm still, like I said, it's my latest work, and I'm still working on it, of these hanging sort of draped collapsed forms. And I thought it just might be interesting to show you one of those, and how I do, just to finish off the running section. So making it reasonably thin. Any questions?
We are receiving actually quite a lot of, like you are receiving quite a lot of beautiful comments.
Thanks.
You know, like everybody is saying, wow, it's so great to see how other potters are working. Everyone has a different way. Lovely to see your way, Jane, by Sandra. And Claire has just sent us a little comment saying, I'm really loving this too. The graceful throwing and personal touches are really inspiring.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear.
I just also would like to say that it's 4:13, so we have a couple of more minutes before we are going on a tea break. So this is probably the last demo for...
We're running 15 minutes behind, everyone. I apologise. Always the case. I'm talking too much. We actually had something else to show you in the throwing section, and when Sabrina, in this part of the demo, and when Sabrina and I went through it the other day, we thought, oh no, we have to cut it out, because we've only got 2.5 hours, which is just not enough time to actually show you. Now, I'm going to pull these out a bit, play around with a bit, and just show you about some of this collapsing kind of forms, with a kind of ode to Takeshi Yasuda, who is a friend of mine, and I don't think he would mind. In fact, I must tell him that I'm doing this, because if he does mind, he'd better say so. I think it's quite important to make things your own, though, and if you do get an idea from someone, to be able to take it into a new realm and do something else with it, I think is quite important. It's important to your sense of ethics as well, you know, that you don't want to be seen to be blatantly copying someone. But at the same time, an idea can often spark into something really exciting, and you shouldn't ignore that, you know, just go with it. So that's probably enough for it to collapse here. I might just pull this central one out a little bit. This will become a platter afterwards. Well, if it survives this rigorous process, aggressive process, it will become a platter. So at this point, when it's nice and wet, I basically just encourage it to flop. And I'm just going to leave it like that now because it's flopped nicely. Once it hardens up, I'll be able to cut it, open it, smooth it out, play with it a bit more, and create. I don't know whether you guys can show that one, that long one that's drying there on the table, but there's one there that I'll be putting slip on. So essentially, that central piece that's in your screen on the screen now is made in the same, exactly the same way as this. So it's a fun technique, and I'm having a lot of fun making hanging wall pieces with it and draping them over hooks. I'm calling them collapse, which is kind of like what we're going through at the moment in the world. I just wanted to talk a little bit about touch first and show you these. I took this photo this morning just to kind of, I lined up a few people whose work exhibits what I think is a signature touch of theirs. And you may or may not recognise some of these people, but we've got Gwyn Hanson-Piggott on the left and Sandy Lockwood next. So starting from the left and moving over, Sandy Lockwood, Jan Kesby, who I know is here on this Zoom. Hello, Jan. Beautiful cup in there. Andrew Halford, Ryoji Koye, I always get that mixed up, Koye? Yeah, Ryoji Koye, Janet Debus, and Alyssa Helen Hansen. And I wanted to talk about signature touch just for a little bit because, of course, that's what I'm kind of doing when I'm touching clays. It's reflecting us. It's reflecting us back to ourselves again and to the world as well through our objects. And I just pulled these off my shelf this morning thinking, if I was to put words onto some of these objects, what would they be? And I haven't really planned this very much, so bear with me. But I think for Gwyn Hanson-Piggott, it would be serene and smooth, thin, very quiet. The sense of touch is barely there. It's almost like the clay is just breathing out, into that shape. And with Sandy Lockwood, it's a little bit more dynamic, or a lot more dynamic. You can see the throwing lines there, and she's really pulled up the clay quite quickly, it looks like, and a wavy top, wavy rim there. So again, some kind of other adjectives come to mind, like more freely expressive, perhaps. Jan Kesby's little You Know Me, I don't know, Jan might like to explain what her sense of touch is to her, but hers has been cut as well. So if you want to jump in, Jan, you can just unmute yourself if you want to sort of describe your particular sense of touch.
Thank you, Jane. It's so lovely to be here. Well, mine, it's very textural because I feel, the world we live in and the places where I like to explore are very textural. And that's, usually in hiking and the environment, so, we're out there and quite often we dismiss looking at those little nuances and subtleties. I mean, they can even be on a tree, they can be on the ground. And that's what I like to try and capture, that freedom. And
yeah, lovely. And to me, there's a real sense of gutsiness about your work too, that it's strong and gutsy, and it's got maybe like a trunk of a tree. I don't know whether that's
Yes, so true, because I'm looking at those things all the time, Jane, and it's like just noticing your surrounds and what speaks to you. And, I really like the thought that you find it gutsy, because I feel, my pots they're strong, they're robust, and they've got this gutsy quality. And the wood firing process, I mean, that is also can be quite a gutsy process.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Jan. Yeah, and so, yeah, you can see even just from 3 different pots here, the sense of touch is what I'm trying to focus on rather than the influences. But the sense of touch is something, something unique to all of us, and it's our signature. Moving on to Andrew Halford. Andrew, and we talked a little bit about this before when I showed you images of his work, but Andrew's work to me speaks of strength, but like a really good grounded strength, but with a softness as well. So he's got strength, his forms are strong, and his sense of touch is really strong, but he also has some soft nuances that he finishes off with. Ryoji Koye has, again, a little bit like Sandy Lock with that sort of the throwing lines and the kind of quickness and the speed. But in his case, I think it's a little bit more hesitant and a little bit more considered, in the sense that he's taken more time. It looks like he's taken a little bit more time. Even though it's speed, he's hesitated. And I don't mean hesitant in a bad way. I mean it in a really lovely, soft way and considered way. Janet Debus has just got like one throwing line in there, that lovely single spiral moving through the body of the pot, and that is all. And her pot is again like Win Hanson Pig. It's really fine, perfectly refined and smooth, but just with one line, it sort of leads your eye into it. So her sense of touch, again, slightly different. And Elissa Helen Hansen on the end. Elissa is from Norway, and you may know her work. She's a wonderful potter. And hers, I feel like hers is kind of so soft and so slow in so many ways, but in the best possible way. And her sense of touch is still very confident and there, but it's not aggressive in any way. It's confident again, but soft. So I just wanted to quickly show you some of that, just to talk about that and try and put words in adjectives and descriptions into them, because I think if you do that with your own work, it can be a way of finding out who you are and what your work is all about. And this is precisely what I did when I did my master's degree back in the early 2000s. It was a way of exploring my sense of touch. So from the top left corner is kind of a hesitant one, and in my case the sense of touch is not just in the throwing but in the slip as well, because slip is it's a layer of liquid clay over the top, which it provides another opportunity to actually touch the clay and to get into the body of it and explore it. So from a hesitant, kind of playful, exploratory sense of touch on the top right to, if we jump over to the, top left, if we jump over to the middle right, is more aggressive, more like an X-ray, of my fingers just stamped in clay. And then the bottom left is much freer and more expressionistic. So you can see there's 3 completely different ways of touching clay there. The one that I probably have taken with me is the one on the top left, and that's the one that I'm playing with a lot more in my work. These 2 bowls are the same form that I just made for you on the wheel. I call them fluid bowls. The idea is that they're just capturing that dynamic movement. I've talked about that already, but these are just some of the ways that I finished them with slip in order to enhance that movement and sort of freeze some of that wetness in the making process. And when I put slip on, I love that moment before it dries, and I'm trying to sort of capture that. But I'm also trying to capture that fluidity as well of water. In my case, it's really related to water and movement and fluidity. And of course, those links to that background of mine with training with Mingyay associations is very much there. But I hope I've taken it into a different expression. At least that's my aim. In my teenage years, I sort of loosely touched on the fact that I was a cowgirl teenager because I lived on a cattle farm in northeast Victoria, and our farm bordered the Murray River, so we were always swimming the horses in summer, and we had a couple of islands, big islands, like 100-acre islands in the middle of the river, and we would take the cattle across and back. So water was very much part of my upbringing in my teenage years. And so that led into expressions of fluidity. How can I enhance that more? This form, I wanted to make for you one of these, but it's so closely aligned to the fluid bowl in the sense that I've cut it and rethrown it, that I felt like I didn't need to. We knew we would run out of time. Sabrina and I were discussing what to drop out, and this one dropped out of the making process at least, but I have got one that I'm going to decorate for you. So you will see one that I've made before, but essentially the cutting is in a different place. And again, like exploring all of those things, these things don't just happen in the moment. They happen often over many years and many practices, many times practicing them, trying to get a particular expression just right. So yeah, I can really encourage people to me, that's where the fun is, in really going deeply into something, exploring it, making it your own. And I feel like I've been able to hang on to the wheel in that way, and to hang on to those original attractions of the wheel, which still speak to me, and I still really like that connection to clay, and so through that sense of touch, I'm connecting with not just to the clay, but hopefully beyond, to the people who use it as well. And the teapots, we've just seen a teapot being made, but I'll assemble one and show you, but that's the curve at the top. And these are some more pillow forms, enclosed forms without any harsh edge line. And these are miniatures. These are just made with my pinkies, my two little pinkies, and just pulled up in one move. And again, exploring. These didn't go anywhere, but in the sense that I didn't explore that expression any further. But as part of a master's degree, they were quite pivotal. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about function and art. Not that I want to dive into that hoary old debate at all, but I feel like it's important to say, at least with my work, that I don't want to differentiate between them. I think of them, if they're functional pieces, I think of them as being functional and being able to have integrity with food and hold and food and serve food or used for food. But on the other hand, I also hope that they have some kind of presence of themselves when they're not being used, which is similar to a sculpture and can be admired perhaps just for its own energy or its own sense of who it is. And that's where the hanging forms, the most recent forms, I think come in, because they are definitely not functional for food, and I've moved on from them, and I'll show you images of those in a minute. So, that was supposed to be our 5-minute break because I stuffed it up, everyone, and I was going to show you those, all of those images before we broke. But now we're into the latest work. So, ideas. This was just a photo. I quite like this photo. A friend of mine snapped it in my studio one day, and I had on the board, I was thinking about where does inspiration come from. It's not just history, but of course history, your history of other pots, where you are in the lineage of the world in terms of world ceramics. Of course, all of that can be fascinating, but it's also about your own research, which we've discussed, but your heart as well, your emotions, what moves you. And I do feel like I really want to go into my emotions quite deeply when I'm making things these days and be moved by the process of making. It might be something that you just stumble upon, like those collapsed forms. You know, I had an idea, but I kind of just stumbled on them in that kind of way. So a happy accident, we like to call them at Slow Clay. They can often lead to unexpected solutions. And the last thing is play, but in a way where you've got parameters. So I think when people play, you might misunderstand me, because I don't mean it as in loosely just, you know, going for it necessarily, or that might work for some people. But in terms of putting some parameters on your experiments and being playful within those frameworks, and that can really guide you and ground you as well. So I just wanted to talk about some of more recent work which has been more, perhaps a little bit more conceptual, because ideas and concepts can come from the materials themselves, which they did in the past for me, or they might come from things like, in this body of work, this is called River Reflections. This work was made in response to the Murray River, but also in response to, and my childhood there, and but also in response to the sort of loss of habitat and sadness and loss of Indigenous connection, loss of meaning to the earth, and just a general sort of pervasive sadness overwhelmed me when I was making this work. But it is very much related to the Murray River. So those kind of platters, those platforms are sort of symbolic of the river, and the objects that they're with all have different meanings as well, to me at least. Another body of work that I made a few years, or maybe 2016 or 17, was the rain shadows. I call it rain shadows. These are essentially, and again, moving into sort of thoughts of climate change in particular, and that led to thoughts being interested in water vessels, in traditional water vessels such as a bucket or a watering can, and then the idea of a shadow. So each of those shadows on the bottom slide are taken from actual shadows drawn, cast from a light onto paper, drawn on a template, and then created in clay. And they are either shown with their object or separately, but the idea is that they hang on the wall. They're not necessarily going to sit next to their object in that way, but they can also be platters and be used as platters as well. So most people who've bought them have ended up using them as like cheese platters and things like that. Anyway, more water vessels, so more from the rain shadows. Sorry, I should hold that a little bit longer. I get last slideshow I did, I was accused of going through my slides too quickly, so I'm sorry. I'll try and slow down, but I am aware that we have not much time. Water vessels, again, part of the rain shadows. And then, of course, that got me thinking climate change. Oh, God, I mean, I'm sounding like a really wet fish, you know, really. I'm not actually a very depressed sort of person, but I think, you know, this world, this time that we're living in is particularly depressing, and I am just like everyone else trying to muddle my way through it, and sometimes the work that comes out of it is not terribly uplifting. I'm sorry, but that's just what it is. And so these works were kind of looking outwards towards the planets, thinking we may not have much time left on this earth, so we better start thinking about where else we might be, or how else humanity might survive. I'd like to think we could fix our problems here first. This form, just getting back to sort of forms and materials again, this is a fluid bowl again, so one that I made for you before, and you can see that even though I started making them 20 years ago, I'm still, I mean, this exhibition was just a year and a half ago in Sydney, so, or 2 years, actually 2 years ago. We've lost track of time, strangely. So you can see the undulating rim, but there's a completely different expression here. It's dark, it's foreboding, you know, perhaps, at least to me. Again, the pillow forms are being recycled into different expressions, and this one is called a gas giant. So if you know about the planets that are moving clouds of gases. That's one of them. And again, more planets. So these are all wall pieces, but again, they cross over with function. They can become usable objects if you take them off the wall and you want to use them. That would be perfectly fine by me. In fact, I'd love it. So that's part of the intention. Black clay, I mentioned before, I'm not just using terracotta. I do love experimenting with different clays all the time, and I'm always doing clay tests and glaze tests as well. So this black clay I've really loved working with. It's from the Netherlands, and it's not very great to be importing black clay. So I've got a few bags of it left, but I'm not going to import it anymore. I've made that decision. So when it's gone, it's gone. But it's a lovely clay, very gutsy. And you can see here a bit more close up that it's got this incredible texture to it and it's incredibly gutsy. So these last pieces, you saw me collapsing that bowl before, and then these are some of the things that I do with them. So draping them on wall hooks and hanging them loosely, wrapping them around each other, and I'm still very much, I'm really excited by this work and where it's leading, and really quite interested to see where it takes me. I've got a few exhibitions coming up that I'm going to be putting these sorts of pieces in, and I've got a whole studio at home with them, and these are some that are sitting there. One of these I brought in with me that you've already seen. But essentially, yeah, I'm having fun with this whole loosey-goosey expression. But yeah, I wanted to come back and say again, right, just to finish, that they are walls of clay. There's essentially just walls. So that that platter in the background with the meat on it, that's again made in the same process, and it came from one like this one in the front, which is undulating and lifted. And the very last thing I want to say is when you're designing an exhibition, if you're designing an exhibition, I always love to think of it as not just singular pieces, but as an installation. So where they're going to go in relation to each other, how much space you want in between them, how they connect and read with objects next to them. I always send a little mud map like this with work into an exhibition so that the curator has an idea of my vision and how I see them being shown. It doesn't always work out that they end up in the same way because, of course, curators have their own ideas, but at least they've got an idea of what I'm aiming for. So thank you. That's the end of the second presentation and last presentation. There's a few contacts details there, but I just go ahead and thank also Craft Contemporary because it's very wonderful that they're having this festival for the whole month of October. But I am also going to get back in and finish off those pots for you. So I'll stop sharing the screen now. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned before that we just hit the lid to the two buttons out onto it. And again, apologies to those of you. This is very basic for. And I've put it in here. And essentially, I'm going to. That was just to make sure it's not going to fall through the lid, because I'm going to cut it a lot less than that. So what I'm doing now, and so essentially I'm just going to cut through that central. So this is exactly what I've just made for you before. Whoops. There's always something going to go wrong, isn't there? I think I'll get that out afterwards because otherwise I'll need tongs or chopsticks and I haven't got any with me. But you've got the idea. I was planning to grab it before it fell through. There's always something that goes wrong. But here we've got this curve at the top, which I quite like. And I'm applying a little bit of water to it now. And essentially, because it's still leather hard, it's softening up under my hands. And I can get into that and create a flange in there. Come back and measure it, make sure that it is not too small or big. And get measurement right. So you can see this is sort of, I don't know, for those of you that are professional, this is just my kind of take on teapots, really. And I quite like the idea that there's this curve underneath it. Some people might not think it's very practical because it's catching all the tea under the curve, makes it a bit difficult to wash. But if you you just broke the end of that, the end of the calipers. So there, yeah. But it doesn't, when you're pouring out of the teapot, it's going to be holding tea. So that was stuck, I stuck it on to the wheel. Here we go. And base, let's see if I can do the base as well, if we stick properly. Okay. I will just put it, I normally do these in a chuck, holding it from the so that it's not sitting in the room, but wasn't really prepared enough for that. The new turning tool. By the way, if there are any slow play students here in the audience, which I think there might be, these are our new turning tools. Can you see that close up, Jeff? These are our new turning tools, and it's one very happy lockdown project. So I've got somebody making them for me, which is great. So I hope you're all going to appreciate them when you come back. And also we're hopefully we're going to be able to sell them. So if anyone else wants one, just let us know. We'll have them on the website. Other than that, I won't do a hard sell. That's it. So what I'm doing here is just trimming a bit. I can hear that's quite soft. Just take a little bit more off the edge here. Because what I want to do with these is just reflect some of that softness that's in the rim, but reflected in the base. So again, by putting some moisture on it. So it's leather hard, but it's responding to a little bit of encouragement, and I'll be mimicking the rim in the base. Not cutting it out though, obviously. You don't want a hole in it, but it's more like this is, again, like that was my take on rims before. It's my take on footprints, if that makes any sense. And you have to touch, make sure it's not too rough. When I was in Japan, so this tool is just hanging on as a string. It's just this fine clay, but it's made into this round, and it's heavy, it's solid, made into this round form at the end. So that if I was to tap it like this, it would indent where I'm going to put the holes for the tea strainer. And so that actually is, you can kind of, I do this with all my teapots because I really like to have a strainer inbuilt into it, but I also don't want to have a big wide clunky spout. So once I put the spout on and covers it, it's generally quite sort of an movement. And then poking the holes then, which I'm not going to do all of them, but you've got the idea. When that's all covered in holes, then attaching the spout, cutting it into shape, which I'll just do a super rough, quick version. And get the idea, and it sits over the hole. So that gives a tea strainer within the teapot, which I really quite like. It's not to everybody's taste, but I do like it myself. So that's that. That's for teapots, because I don't want to take up all your time with teapots. Now I'm just going to do a bit of slip decoration. So I've got, this is a pot from the massage series that I showed you. Which one do I look at? That one? Yeah. So it's got a wide flat base. It's got an undulating wall and rim, and I've also put a couple of holes in here for handles. This is like one that was on our marketing on our Instagram. And I didn't get a chance to make one like this for you because there's only so much you can do. But what I wanted to do is just show you the trimming process, which is very, very complex. But it's take a vegetable peeler and just move it around. You couldn't get much more simple than that, really. But my theory, and my teachers too, most of them also were of the opinion that you don't have to trim something. Why trim it? If you can get away with doing something like this, then do it. Why not? I mean, a lot of people spend so much time trimming their pots, and I know if you've got porcelain clay or a very dense clay that you have to make very thick things and then basically trim your form to get a form from clay like that. I know that's an exception to the rule, but generally speaking, if you can get away without trimming, I just kind of like it. I like being able to do something simply, quickly, in the moment, and something again that preserves that freshness of the making process, if you like. So just by carving it out like that, I'm getting a sense of that form now. And it's the way that it just echoing the way that it was made with the same kind of energy as the way that it was made. So this is where Ramona's question about am I going to plan? I actually haven't planned what I'm going to do with this one. But let's just see how it goes. What I might do, I've planned it tiny. I've got materials ready, but I will just tidy it up a little bit and leave it in the sponge. This clay is not terracotta, by the way. I just used the slow clay mid-fire. We have a mid-fire blend here at Slow Clay, which is from Bennett's in South Australia, which is made with a combination of earthenware and stoneware. It's a great clay. I wanted to test one with our clay here at Slow Clay so that I could fire it with our glaze and see what happened on these forms. So I've got a bit of black slip, and I've got a bit of slow clay Russian slip. I do have the signature. I have a couple of stamps, and you won't be able to see this class, but and it doesn't really matter. It's not important. But I have these little bamboo stamps that I sign things in, and it's just more of a habit than anything that I just like to stamp things. It's just a little studio stamp.
Jane, there is just a little question from Mina saying, do you pull your handles?
On a teapot?
Probably. I think she's referring to teapots.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I was actually thinking I would bring one in, but I extrude them here. Those particular ones on the teapots that you see on the images. And also, I'll grab this one here from off this shelf and show you this finished one. So these handles have, they're pretty much made like a curve. I don't know if you can see the inside, but the curves in there, and then it's got this rounded top to them. And I really like this curve to them. What I do is I extrude them and then I pull them a bit thinner and get a shape into them, and then set them in the shape before I join them on. And this one is a sort of combination between an over-the-top handle and a side handle. And I've been playing around with those. It gives people a few different options of how to hold them. And you can see here that's the flange as well that I was working on before. So yeah, the handles are extruded and pulled at the same, like afterwards a little bit. I don't have any issue with making things that are, you know, from molds or whatever, you know, so whatever techniques suit you. So this is a pigment, a black slip pigment that I'm just giving a little bit of a mix up here. And I'll just try and do one that's a bit similar, perhaps a little bit similar to the one that was in the image. Just making the centre a bit black.
And Jane, do you make your own slip?
Yeah, I do. I always make my own slips and glazes because I feel that if I don't know what's in them, I can't alter them if they need altering. So I do always make my own. And I'm just kind of sponging, I don't know if you guys can't see the inside there, but I'm just sort of sponging the edges back and making it a bit softer. And then I've got a couple of different brushes here. This is just like a $5 brush from an Asian grocery, probably. But I really love it because it's thick and unctuous, and I can just ladle it on like this and just do a very simple movement, and it's done. You know? And the same with the outside if I do that. So simple, but what I'm trying to get is a sort of sense of lusciousness, but also echoing something about what's happening with the plot itself. And again, for me, because these materials are so elemental, they're so, there's not much complexity to them. The complexity is more in the throwing than the making, and the materials themselves are so simple. But I guess that's what I'm after. I don't want to do any fancy finishes. So that's that one. Yeah. When I say the materials are simple, if anyone's used slip at earthenware temperatures, you'll know that it's actually not very simple at all. And I'm completely lying through my teeth when I say that it's simple. It's really hard to get a good fit at earthenware temperatures between body, a slip, and a glaze, because nothing fuses like it does at stoneware at high temperatures. It's still a little, the body itself can still be quite porous where it's unglazed, and where it's glazed, it might just be the difference of a little bit of thickness, and it can peel off and shear off. And that's the last thing you want. So yeah, it's actually quite tricky to get the timing right with slip. Whereas at stoneware temperatures, it doesn't really matter. You can leave it a day, I'll come back to it. So the reason I chose this one is because it's half done, and I want to continue it and get it finished as soon as I can. So these two different slips were for two different clays. So the slip I just used out of that bucket, this is a slow clay slip that we make to match our clay. It's slow clay. And this slip is from my home studio for the terracottas. It is Copland terracotta. What I might just do with this one is just do a split that way, and then split that way. And then that's pretty much it. And if there's any drips or anything that I can encourage, I might just take off a little bit as well. And I'll just get my fingers into anything like that, that will burn out, or I can just take it. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to do any more to that, because the more you touch it, in this case, I feel the more I'm going to ruin it. So, have we got there? I think we've got there.
We have. Thanks so much, Jane, for sharing like your knowledge with all of us, and thanks everybody for joining us for 2.5 hours. Really, we hope to see you all back in our studio. Thank you. Bye bye.